Welcome to Recovery with Root, a podcast centered on topics surrounding mental health and addiction. Through our Advanced Recovery Institute, a new entity of the Root Center for Advanced Recovery, we are committed to research and training to elevate clinical care. We hope you find this podcast informative, and most of all, we hope that it helps improve the lives of others. Remember, we're in this together, and recovery is possible. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Recovery with Root. I'm Margot Farrell, Chief of Staff here at the Root Center for Advanced Recovery, and I've got an exciting episode in store today. Dr. John Nazarian joining us, our new Chief Medical Officer. John, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Margot.
Long time coming. We're so excited to finally have you here. Tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to Root.
I'm a psychiatrist, and I also have board certification in addiction psychiatry. So addiction psychiatry has been a very important part of my career all along. Prior to being here, I was the medical director at an agency called Community Mental Health Affiliates, or CMHA, in New Britain. I had been there for a total of 11 years, medical director for the past 4. I'd heard of Root for years and years since I've really been in Connecticut, even when it was known as Hartford Dispensary, and always aware of the work that Root has been doing. And this opportunity arose, and it was something that I was very passionate about pursuing. So I have had a lot of experience working with individuals with opioid use disorder, especially in my private practice, providing treatment with buprenorphine. And this seemed like an excellent fit for the things that I enjoy doing, and the people that I feel passionate about serving. So that's what brought me to Root.
I'm always interested to hear, so specifically with someone who's been familiar with Root and the work that we've done back, dating to Hartford Dispensary, which that goes back to 1871. So we've got a long storied history. What about our history stuck out to you? I'm curious just to know, what was your outside perception of Root?
Any program that provides methadone maintenance is a very specialized program. They provide a treatment modality that most other people aren't able to because of the strict regulations and the processes involved. I'd never worked at a place where methadone maintenance was a modality. So to me, it was a very special thing that any agency that was providing that treatment had to be very specific and very careful about how they provide that treatment. So it always seemed to me like a carefully run program that was able to provide something that really nobody else was going to be able to provide, such as, in a general adult psychiatry clinic, for example. You weren't going to find that treatment. To me, it seemed that it was a program that was providing a specific modality that just was not going to be available other places.
Interesting. I just, there's no right or wrong answer. I just always am curious because we have such a long history that most folks have heard of Root at some point or another. A lot of times it's as our background of Hartford Dispensary. So it's just interesting to hear.
I think the thing is that there's so many places you can go to get treatment for depression, to get treatment for alcohol use disorder, and until buprenorphine came along, then okay, so you can go to various places to get buprenorphine or naltrexone for that matter. But if you want methadone maintenance, there are only very specific places you can go. So, and if you're working at one of those other treatment sites, you need to have a resource to send individuals to who really need methadone maintenance as their treatment modality. And there's just only so many places you can go. So it was always a very valued resource that you knew that anywhere I've ever worked, that just was never an option to provide. So knowing a place that I could send people to that needed that treatment modality, that's what was important. And Root was always the number one choice as far as me personally and the various people at other places where I've worked. That's where we would send folks if we knew they needed that treatment.
Well, I love hearing that, at least. So that's a good part. And, it kind of plays into, so going back into your history, so you're saying you've always known of Root. It was a place that, you could rely on. What got you into this specific career field? What drew you to this career as a choice to begin with?
When I decided to go to medical school, the idea I had in my mind was to be a family doc, what we called back then a family doc, general internist, I guess you could say. However, I knew I had a bit of an interest in psychiatry, and I was very fortunate. The medical school I went to had a track that allowed for early exposure to psychiatry from the very first year of medical school, which is unusual in medical school training. So that added exposure helped me know earlier on that that was much more interesting to me. At the end of the day, I found myself much more interested to hearing what people had to say about their lives rather than their physical ailments. And it's to this day, if I'm in a room with a patient and they start talking about their physical ailments, my eyes just kind of glaze over because it's not something that is a natural interest for me. I want to hear about what's happening in their day to day. I want to hear about their relationships. I want to hear about what makes them tick, for lack of a better word. I'm not saying that what happens on the physical side isn't important. Of course it is, but that's not where my passion is. So I knew that pretty early on in medical school. So it made it very easy to choose psychiatry as my specialty.
And then veering into specifically with substance use disorder, how did you get into that niche?
So I was really fortunate. My residency, my internship, the internship was part psychiatry, part internal medicine. The psychiatry part, one of the very first units I rotated on was the alcohol and drug rehab unit. It was a 30-day voluntary unit. And one of the things that we did was we co-led group therapy with one of the counselors. These were people who were voluntarily in the hospital for recovery, and those group therapy sessions and getting to know the patients there was really very fulfilling, and I would even say fun. I think what I liked a lot was seeing people's lives turn around relatively quickly. I think that I also had wonderful mentors, and that really helped me to have a very positive experience with working with individuals with addiction. And I think that paved the way for me to have that interest. Now, I can't say that from the get-go that was an area that I was going to pursue, but even in my first couple of jobs out of residency, even though treating people with addictions wasn't the mainstay, it was always a piece of it. So there was always a component of what I was doing that was geared towards treating individuals with substance abuse. So it was always kind of there in the background. And then with another mentor who encouraged me to take the addiction psychiatry boards, I did, and it became a part of what I pursued from that point forward. You know, any kind of job that I took had a component where there was either some detox involved or rehab involved, and so it remained a part of the picture. And then really became a major focus for me in 2012 when I started my small private practice that was specifically geared towards people with substance use disorder and getting them treated with buprenorphine.
How do you kind of blend the two? You have the private practice side, and then you have kind of the agency side. What is it like for you having both?
Well, at this point, for all intents and purposes, I have wound down the private practice. But when it was going full tilt and I was working full time at CMHA, the private practice was only in the evenings on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So after I was done for the day, I would go to my practice and I'd be there until maybe 9 or 10, running groups, seeing individuals. I did see some people with depression and anxiety, but it was mostly opioid use disorder. And it was very different from what I was doing during the day, because at CMHA I was working more with people with chronic mental illness and people with autism spectrum disorder. It was a very different practice there from what I was seeing in my private practice. So it was a really nice complement. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. The pandemic changed everything. The groups stopped. They never reconstituted. And separate from my decision to come to Root, I had decided much earlier this year that I was going to wind down my private practice, and I began that process in April, completed it at the end of October, and all of that was happening well before even this opportunity had arisen.
So it's almost like it was like setting you up for it. It seems like it was meant to be.
I feel that way. I feel that way because I don't think that I would have wanted to continue working at that capacity in taking on this position.
What are you looking forward to most in your role here now?
First of all, just one of the things I love about my field is that I get to keep learning and learning and learning. And I could have said this to you when you asked me why psychiatry, because I could tell you that it's never boring. This field is never boring. So I'm looking forward to learning. I'm looking forward to learning about methadone maintenance, treatment, especially now that many of the changes are occurring with how methadone maintenance treatment is going to be happening in this country. And I'm looking forward to the people I'll be working with. That's probably the one thing I'm going to miss the most, having left CMHA after all those years, is the wonderful people that I got to work with there. So I'm looking forward to the new connections I'll be making, the new relationships I'll be making with my colleagues here. I'm looking forward to being a resource. I'm looking forward to being a resource for the folks here. I find that a lot of folks who are steeped in treating individuals with opioid use disorder or addictions in general may not have as much of a strong background in mental health in general. And I'd like to be a resource to provide that kind of training, that kind of background, support.
And because, of course, we know that most folks, especially most folks who are coming to see us, it's a co-occurring situation. So,
Absolutely.
we can't just look at one side of the coin. There's usually other things involved at play.
Absolutely. And I think even more so, it's become a bit of a cliche, but it's no less true that the pandemic brought out so much more difficulties. Managing and navigating life has become more difficult, I think, as a result of the pandemic, and that brought out a lot more to the fore the mental health issues that many people have had that might have been just covered over prior to the pandemic and were just exposed in such a raw way afterwards. And I think knowing more about that, it will help treat individuals with addiction, being able to also focus on their mental health as well.
One of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the podcast, obviously to introduce you to folks and also just to get to know you a little bit more. I think, we've talked about this a little bit. I think that sometimes in healthcare, things can come off really sterile, which is a good thing, obviously, for most situations, right? We want to get rid of the germs. But when we're getting to know people, we don't really want to be in a sterile situation. We want to see personality. We want to see emotions. What do you think is something that folks may be surprised to know about you? I'm putting you on the spot here. I'm fully aware.
Well, I'm a huge music fan. I love going to concerts. In fact, I was at one Sunday night.
Who were you seeing?
So one of my all-time favorites is an artist named Amy Mann. People may know her as the lead singer of a band from the 80s called Till Tuesday, but she's had a phenomenal solo career since. The band broke up, and I think I've tried to catch her almost every single time she's toured. And fortunately, she loves coming to New England. She has a background of having studied at the Berklee College of Music, so even though she was there for a while, and so she makes her way to New England. That's been my experience. I saw her down in Norwalk. She was putting on a little Christmas show with another artist named Ted Leo. It was a lot of fun. So music is a huge passion of mine. I love going to concerts. I love to travel. Travel at every opportunity I can get.
Do you have a favorite travel destination?
Well, my mom lives in Las Vegas, so I go to Las Vegas a lot. But as far as favorite travel destinations, I love the Cape.
I was going to say beach or mountains. Are you beach or mountains?
Beach, absolutely beach.
Okay.
And preferably a warm destination.
Warm. So it's a good thing you live here in Connecticut. That's good.
I have to say that I'm originally from Maryland. I grew up in the D.C. suburb. Of course, my friends ask me, well, why Connecticut, or what do you like about Connecticut? And I say I really love Connecticut. I love everything about being here. The only thing I don't love is the length of the winters. It could certainly get cold in Maryland, but by March, the cherry blossoms are out. It's definitely spring, and here you could wait until the end of April before that happens.
Yeah, here you could have a snowstorm in the middle of March.
Exactly.
You really don't know what you're getting here. Oh, I love that. I just want to put some personality to it. So when folks see your face on our marketing materials or giving a grand rounds or something like that, that they know a little bit behind the person, because I think it's so important, especially when we're talking about things like mental health and substance use and all these topics that are usually hidden in the shadows. Why not personalize it? Why don't you talk a little bit about your approach when it comes to mental health, when it comes to substance use and recovery? Here at Root Center, we're very big on harm reduction. We're very big on changing the language that folks use, on lessening the stigma, the discrimination that still exists. Talk a little bit about your stance when it comes to all of that.
Sure. So I have to credit incredible mentors that I've had, one of whom, Dr. Sam Silverman, who has been in Connecticut for a long time, at Rushford especially. He helped guide me when I was putting my private practice together, and it wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for him. But the whole approach of providing treatment for individuals based on what they can receive, what they can do, what they can get from treatment, any movement forward is positive to me. And I've certainly seen what it's like when someone is treated within a very rigid, structured program, and it seems that it may not be the intent, but it seems to come across as somewhat punitive to the patients. And that's one thing that I have tried to avoid, and got that kind of validation from my mentors that at the end of the day isn't the most helpful approach. And so even when I was doing my private practice and seeing mostly individuals with opioid use disorder and running my groups, I would tell my patients when they came, I said, it would have to be something really egregious for me not to continue working with you, such as you're dealing in the parking lot. But short of that, I would tell them, if you come up positive for a drug screen, it doesn't mean that you can't come back. We need to talk about what more do you need, because you clearly don't need less, you need more. So that was my approach from the get-go. What can any treatment modality do to help you do better? And I think with that as a priority, then whether you call it harm reduction or meeting people where they are at, I think it's the same philosophy. The idea is whatever will help someone be able to move forward in their recovery is, I think, what's going to be best for them. And it may be very different from one person to the next, but that's what makes it exciting. Everybody's different. You can see, okay, for this person, this is going to be really helpful. And some people really need that kind of very regimented, you better do things this way. They respond well to that, and they'll tell you. But it may not work for someone else. Someone else might need a lot more, leeway to make mistakes. Both approaches work well. I mean, I think the idea, though, is that tailoring the approach to what's going to help any particular individual is really important.
Well, I think what you said there, for some individuals that may work, right? Like the person who comes in and says, I need you to be firm with me. I need you to hold me accountable. And this is what that looks like for me. And then you may have someone who comes in and doing that is going to push them in the opposite direction.
Exactly.
But you just said you knew that somebody might like version A, somebody might like version B, and that you're willing to meet the person where you're at. And my guess is, and I have no clinical background, but I would like to assume that just in approaching anything in life, that when you go with the way the person seems to learn or seems to respond, then your chances of success go up as well.
Absolutely.
How would you approach maybe a clinician, a counselor, someone who is more used to that old school, we'll call it, kind of thinking? What would you say now, new CMO coming in? How would you try to get somebody to shift their point of view to seeing it as more of a meet somebody where they're at today?
I think people who come into this field are doing it because they want to make people's lives better. And I think that some things have changed in the landscape now that call for a change in mindset. One of them being the advent of fentanyl, for example, and the incredibly dangerously high overdose rates that we have. So that if our main goal is to help people stay alive, be in recovery, move forward in their lives, period, as the landscape changes, that also means that we need to change how we provide treatment. And that's how I would couch it. Not, well, those are the old ways, we don't do things the old ways anymore, these are the new ways. That's the overarching principle is still the same. It's the tools we use. How can we help the most? Because the danger of people left to their own ways of doing things, the stakes are much higher now than they not that they weren't high before, but they're so much higher now that anything we can do that will keep individuals engaged in treatment, whatever that treatment may be, I think we're providing more of a service doing that than perhaps how things might have been in the past. I think that agreeing on that overarching principle, I think helps people to see things as they are today. And the reality is things are very different today. Things are so different today from 2012 when I started my private practice. If it were like they were today, I might have done things differently back then too.
Being willing to adapt, all about the approach, and then also all about the individual's needs and assessing what does success look for that person, because a 10 out of 10 for you and me could look very differently than for someone else. So,
and I think the rules before were also a lot more onerous than they are today. I think that in the past, because the rules were onerous and the perceived punishment for breaking rules seemed very high, people were very afraid, I think, to do anything beyond what the rules allowed. And I think that because the landscape is different today, and I think because there is a wider acceptance to what constitutes a successful treatment, that allows us to be freer in how we approach treatment. It wasn't that long ago that abstinence was the only way to consider recovery. And it wasn't that long ago when individuals who, say, had alcohol use disorder, they were going to AA, and they were told if you're on an antidepressant, you're on a mind-altering substance, and therefore you're not in recovery. We've come a long way from that kind of thinking, but it's along those lines. The landscape is different now. I think people understand the need for medications for depression, anxiety, ADHD, and I think it's a trajectory along those lines as far as a wider understanding of what addiction is about, and a little more leeway than in the past to provide treatment that isn't as rule-bound as it had been in the 1950s and 60s and 70s.
I mean, we're certainly happy to have you on board because, of course, we want to build a team of folks who share that same thought process and can help move that forward into the world so that slowly but surely we change folks' mind to see that, this may be the better path to help the most amount of people. Going forward, I know you're just a little bit in here. You're like a weekend, so I'm putting you on the spot, but what are you most excited about or most looking forward to at Root?
Well, there's some really exciting initiatives that Root has, especially the residential facility that's going to be opening soon, the facility that just opened in Brantford that I have not seen yet that I'm really excited to see. But I think the opportunities of growth here and being a part of that and helping to shape that and to identify needs that should be addressed, I'm excited about that. There's so much happening here. It's interesting that I feel fortunate that I'm coming on board at a time when there's so much happening at its infancy, so that I can be a part of helping shape that.
Yeah, by the time this episode airs, we will be 1 week shy of our New Britain residential grand opening. Wow. So, yeah, and we just had a Brantford open house, as you mentioned. So you're coming at a perfect time. So I love to hear that.
I'm very excited about that.
Well, Dr. Nazarian, we could not be more excited to have you with us. We know that you're going to bring great expertise and energy. I can certainly feel it already. So thank you for your time today. It was a pleasure getting to know you more.
Thank you, Margot. It's my pleasure, too.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of our podcast, Recovery with Root. As always, stay connected with us on social media to learn about when next podcast episodes will drop. You can comment, ask questions, even let us know about future topics that you'd like to see discussed. Until next time, remember, progress is the destination.